Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Okay. So we're starting off with Sir Syed Ahmad Khan today. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was one of the most prominent leaders of the subcontinent, and he was one of the reasons for the initiation of Pakistan movement. So before we move on to the discussion of his work and how he worked for the revival of Islam in the subcontinent for the Muslims, we're going to look at how we'll study this chapter. So every religious leader um, has a set of beliefs that they work on, and then their influence is obviously on the society, on the country, on a certain group of people or the community. So for this topic, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, we are gonna be looking at his belief system, his beliefs, his work, and the influences. So Sir Syed Ahmed Khan's work, if we talk about work specifically, we divide all of his work into three major categories. Number one is improvement of British-Muslim relations. In yesterday's class, we studied how Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, how after the War of Independence, the British-Muslim relations weren't very good. Why? Because the British, they thought Muslims as a reason for the War of Independence. I mean, obviously, Muslims are a part of all of those uprisings in 1857. So the relations were strained. British, they had started taking severe measures against the Muslims. And obviously, because Muslims saw British as a cultural threat to the culture of the subcontinent, they saw them as foreign invaders who were just trying to replace the religion, the language, the culture, everything. Muslims were also opposing the British education system in India. They were also opposing the language changes and everything. So it was very important for a leader to unite the two communities. Muslims had to accept that British were their rulers now. They had to accept that there's no other way than to live together by cooperation and accept them as their leaders, not leaders, rulers. So yeah, the second important category of Sir Syed Ahmed Khan's work is political reforms. So how he worked for the politics of the subcontinent, and third, the educational reforms. His contributions to the education sector of the subcontinent at that time. Yeah, okay, now back to the topic. So guys, this is what we're going to study in this topic. So Syed Ahmed Khan. If we talk about his belief system, so Syed Ahmed Khan believed that Muslims and British should cooperate together. Number one, that if Muslims were to succeed in their political careers, and I mean generally they should develop good relations with the British, because British were the rulers and they were there for some time now. And this is what we're going to study in history. This is what it tells, that we're talking about 1800s at the moment, and British left the subcontinent in 1947. So yeah, we're talking about next 100 years here. So Sir Syed Ahmed Khan foresaw all of this. He knew that the British are there to stay, and it's good that the Muslims, they established good relations with the British. Why? Because the Hindus at that time, so there was this conflict between the Hindus and the Muslims as well. Hindus, they were campaigning for self-rule at this time. Self-rule is basically how they wanted the British to be out of India. They wanted to rule the subcontinent according to their desires. Obviously, they were offended. Not offended, obviously, they were angered at this 300 years rule of the Mughal Empire as well, because they were told, I mean, this is what they were told, that the Muslims had invaded India, and this is exactly what happened. They had invaded India initially in the beginning of the Mughal. We're talking about the beginning of Mughal Empire here, and obviously their power was taken away and everything. So there were these conflicts between the Hindus and the Muslims, and now there were conflicts between the British and the Indians in general, and especially between the British and the Muslims here. So Syed Ahmad Khan's belief system was that Muslims should cooperate with the British, and it is important for progression at this point. Also, Another belief system of Syed Ahmad Khan was that Muslims must avail British education, because British had implemented this English education system in India. So and Hindus, they were very keen to adapt that system. They were very keen to learn English. They were very keen to basically adapt to the entire new system of education in the subcontinent. Muslims, on the other hand, saw it as a threat to their culture and religion. This is why they were hesitant towards accepting these ideas. So Syed Khan thought that Muslims should now accept these ideas, should accept the education system, should start taking the education. And for the political system, believe that because it's democracy, so it's important that everyone must be given equal rights. Muslims were in a minority, and it was important for the Muslims to have a good number of seats in the parliament to be represented equally according to the ratios of their populations. So yeah, this was the entire belief system of Sir Syed. Now we're going to look at how he worked towards convincing the people of the subcontinent to basically follow his teachings or whatever he was telling the people to do. For example, British Muslim loyalty, British Muslim relations. This first question here, so we're going to again study this topic with the questions because it makes it easier for you guys to understand. How did Sir Syed convince British Muslim loyalty? So this is a 4-mark question. You're just generally asked to write how did he work on his first agenda, that was the British Muslim relations. So he first of all wrote a book, Loyal Mohammedans of India, and that book basically mentioned the Muslims who had helped British during the War of Independence. So he was trying to tell the British that Muslims weren't the sole reason for the uprising of 1857. In fact, on the other hand, Muslims had actually helped the British in the War of Independence, right? Okay, next he wrote another book, which was named Causes of the Indian Revolt in 1857. So in that, it was more of an essay on the causes of the Indian Revolt. So the purpose of writing that was to tell British that the actual reasons of War of Independence were the unfair policies, the unjust systems that the British had brought into the subcontinent with them. For example, the doctrine of lapse, the annexation of lands, the conversions, the forceful conversions to Christianity, the change of language, replacement of Persian with English. So the essay on the causes of the Indian Revolt was basically essay, an account of all of these reasons for the war. So we try to convince British that it's not right to just blame Muslims for the revolt. Then he also presented a translation of this word nadarat. Nadarat was a word that basically, it is an Arabic word which meant helper. And British, it means helper. And the British at that time thought that Muslims are using this word to somehow insult them. A word against the rule. So Syed Ahmed Khan presented a correct translation of this Arabic word to convince British that Muslims are not at all trying to insult them. They're in fact accepting them as helpers. How did Sir Syed convince Muslims of British intentions? Now, the points that we were studying up till now were how Sir Syed tried to convince the British of the Muslims' loyalty. Now he also tried to convince the Muslims of the British intentions. So one of the attempts of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan for the Muslim community was he wrote this book called Tabayyun al-Kalam. So this book had, this was an account of all the similarities between Islam and Christianity. He tried to convince the Muslims that our religion and the religion of, our ruler's religion, Christianity and Islam, they're very similar. We're allowed to sit and eat together. We have similar teachings. So this book, it tried to convince the Muslims to not just think of British as foreign invaders, but accept them now. Then he also formed this British-Indian alliance, which was basically a sort of a democratic alliance that brought together the British and the Muslims to sit down and discuss important economic and political problems. All right. He also convinced British. Muslims thought that at that time, Muslims had this belief system that it wasn't allowed in Islam to sit with a person of another faith and eat. So Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, he tried to convince the Muslims that it was not at all prohibited. You can dine out with people of other faiths as well, and that's not at all prohibited in Islam. So this is how he tried to convince the Muslims of the Muslims of the British intentions here. Now, another question here is a detailed, I mean, it's again a 4-mark question specifically on the causes of Indian revolt, this essay that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan wrote. You need to write points for this. The first point could be that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan tried to convince the British to Muslim loyalty. This was the first thing. Then he presented points as to the reasons that, the actual reasons of the War of Independence. And he convinced British that it was unjust of them to simply blame Muslims for the uprisings. And he actually tried to mention the mistakes of the British that upset the Indians. For example, you can also write a few examples, the doctrine of lapse. You can write the banning of Parda culture. You can write about the forceful conversions to Christianity. You can write about the assassination of Bahadur Shah Zafar, anything like that. Okay. Next question is, what was the loyal Mohammedans of India? Loyal Mohammedans of India, you need to write about this book here. You can just read through the points in the notes. We're moving on to the 7-mark question. Okay, now for the political reforms. Okay, no, we're still talking about the relation, sorry. Aligarh Movement. Aligarh Movement was a movement formed by Sir Syed Ahmad Khan over here. Another step to improve the British-Muslim relations. Let's read through the reasons. So the first reason as to why Aligarh Movement was formed was that he wanted to improve Muslim status and to create awareness. The British, after War of Independence, had blamed Muslims for it. After that, the relations between Muslims and British had become better. So Sir Syed Ahmad Khan formed Aligarh Movement so that the educated Muslims could understand British policies. Again, an attempt to convince the British, to convince the Muslims, people who had, I mean, they presented these articles in the English language to basically convince the Muslims in favor of the British loyalty. So all the Muslims who could understand the language, who were a bit educated at that time. So it was, I mean, a plan for to convince those Muslims to accept British ideas. Now, the reason for the foundation of the Aligarh movement was to improve the status of Muslims in India. Muslims had poor education, most of them were illiterate. Moreover, the British, they rejected British education system, due to which they had declined and stayed backwards from Hindus and British in all fields. Therefore, to raise the state of Muslims and to improve the literacy levels is the launch Aligarh movement. Okay, so we're talking about the education reform here because the Muslims had completely refused to accept the British ideas. They had refused to basically get this modern education that the British were trying to introduce in the subcontinent. So Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, he knew that the Muslims, a lot of problems that the Muslims were facing at that time were due to lack of education. And because it was a democratic state and Hindus, they were in majority and they were also accepting the ideas of the British, it was very important for Muslims to come at that level. I mean, so this is a question for you guys. Hindus were accepting the British ideas. The Muslims were hesitant. Why do you think it was so important for the Muslims to also accept the ideas? I mean, how is this point that Hindus being more inclined towards British, how was this a threat for the Muslims?
Because the Hindus were the majority.
Okay, and how, I mean, how is that benefiting them? The acceptance of ideas and everything.
It's benefiting them because the Muslims are only a little number compared to how much the Hindus are.
Right. So, yeah, we already know that the Hindus were in a majority and the Muslims, I mean, the Muslim population was obviously lesser than the Hindu population. And obviously Hindus, both of these communities existed side by side. And when Hindus were inclined towards these ideas, they were more interested in accepting the British education system and everything. It was a threat for the Muslims because they were trying to establish, Hindus were establishing very sound relations with the British at this time. And British were obviously thinking of Muslims as foreign invaders. So for the Muslims to succeed, for the Muslims to have favorable policies, it was important for them to also accept the ideas. All right, it was important for them in the eyes of the British to basically get recognized, to accept their ideas, not just oppose them for everything that they were doing. Okay, Aligarh movement was also found to promote awareness among Muslims regarding the British and Hindu threats. Hindus became friendly. Yeah, this is what I was trying to tell you. Hindus became friendly with British and accepted their policies. By doing so, they gained influence over Muslims. Sorry, this is incorrect, guys. Just make a correction here. That by doing so, they gained influence over Muslims. Their status went higher as compared to Muslims. So Sir Syed Ahmad Khan wanted to make Muslims politically aware about increased influence of Hindus. Yeah. So it was all about the dominance that the Hindus were trying to show over Muslims, the influence that they had. So Muslims, it was very important for the Muslims to accept the ideas, to also come at that level and to not get dominated under the Hindus. Why did Sir Syed wish to develop better understanding with Muslims following the War of Independence? Simple question. Why did he? So now we're talking about the belief system here. This question specifically talks about the belief system of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. Why did Sir Syed wish to develop better understanding with the Muslims? So these are the three reasons. Number one, again, because the British blamed the Muslims for the war. We've discussed these reasons. You can just go through these points on your own. The notes are there on the Google Drive. Okay, I'll just reiterate the reasons. Once, that the British blamed the Muslims for the war. Second, the British considered Muslims disloyal and untrustworthy. And third, and Muslims thought British as just invaders. So these were the three misconceptions that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan wanted to remove by improving the relations. And then, okay, let's just state it here. We're not moving on to the political reforms at the moment. This two-nation theory is a political reform. So we're going to stay till the British-Muslim relations. This is the question here. Just read through the analysis. They're very important. So I'm giving you guys a class assignment now. You need to attempt this question. Why did Sir Syed wish to develop better understanding with Muslims following the War of Independence? So you're going to write about the belief system of Syed Ahmad Khan. You can obviously read through these notes, but I'd really appreciate if you write your own answers. The analysis are given here. You don't need to write an evaluation. This is a 7-mark question. And I also want you guys to attempt this question. Why did Sir Syed Ahmad Khan found the Aligarh movement? Just a second, guys.